380 missiles are in the air right now, not in a single wave, in a sequenced, layered, doctrine-driven strike architecture that was built specifically to do one thing: exhaust every interceptor, blind every radar, and arrive at its targets during the precise window when the defenders have nothing left to put in the sky against it. And I need you to understand something before we go any further. The missiles are not the most dangerous part of what Iran just launched. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you is the part that changes the entire strategic map of the Middle East. And most people watching the fire right now are not seeing it yet. 380 missiles are in the air, not fired in panic, not launched in desperation, launched in sequence, wave upon carefully calculated wave, from mobile platforms that have been repositioned over the preceding 72 hours with a precision that speaks not of improvisation, but of years of rehearsal. And I am watching this unfold in this fictional construct with the specific and urgent awareness that what is happening right now in the airspace between Iran and Israel is not a battle. It is a proof of concept. It is the operational demonstration of a doctrine that has been building, quietly and patiently, for longer than most of the analysts now appearing on international television have been tracking this conflict. Stay with me, because the fires over Tel Aviv, the intercepts lighting up the night sky, the sirens, the pressure waves moving through populated streets, those are the visible layer. And the visible layer is not where this story lives. I need you to understand something that the headline will not tell you. 380 missiles generate a specific kind of problem for any air defense architecture. Not the problem of raw destructive power, though that problem is real. The specific problem is arithmetic. Every interceptor fired has a cost. Every interceptor fired represents a magazine that is one round lighter. And when the incoming track count is high enough, sustained long enough, and sequenced intelligently enough, the defending system reaches a moment, a specific, calculable, engineered moment at which it has spent more than it can immediately replace. That moment is not an accident in this scenario. That moment was the objective from the beginning, and it is approaching faster than the international community is prepared to acknowledge. What actually breaks first? Keep that question close. We are going to answer it, but the answer is not what you think. Let me take you into the opening minutes of this strike package because the sequencing is everything. The jamming layers go first. They always go first in the Iranian doctrine that this fictional scenario renders operational. Sophisticated electronic warfare platforms, airborne, ground-based, and in this scenario embedded in systems that have been forward positioned through proxy networks in the preceding weeks, begin flooding the specific frequency architecture of Israel's integrated air defense network. This is not wideband noise. This is targeted, frequency-specific suppression designed around the actual signal signatures of the systems being degraded. The Iron Dome radar bands, the David Sling uplink frequencies, the Arrow system's long-range tracking channels. Each has been studied, each has been mapped, each is now being selectively drowned. Then the first wave of missiles arrives. Not all 380. The first wave is deliberately sized, large enough to be threatening, large enough to force the defensive systems to commit interceptors, but not so large that it reveals the full architecture of what is coming. The first wave is the bait. It is designed to pull the defensive magazines in one direction, while the second and third waves are already in motion from different vectors, different altitudes, and different terminal approach geometries that were calculated specifically to complicate the engagement solutions of the interceptor systems that are now committed to the first wave. I am watching the track picture in this scenario, and what I am seeing is an air defense network performing exactly as it was designed, and being overwhelmed precisely because it is performing as designed. Every intercept costs a round. Every engagement removes an option from the board, and the board is running out of options faster than the incoming threat count is running out of missiles. The fires beginning to register across the theater now represent the first failures of that arithmetic. Not the catastrophic collapse, not yet, but the first data points that tell every commander, every analyst, every political leader watching this scenario that the envelope of protective coverage is contracting in real time. And behind those data points is a question that nobody in the command architecture wants to ask out loud. How many waves are left? Look at this with me carefully, because this is where most analysis stops, and where the most important part of this scenario actually begins. The physical damage from 380 missiles, even with significant intercept rates, is serious. Infrastructure is degraded. Forward positions are compromised. The population centers that have been brought under direct ballistic threat are experiencing a psychological pressure that has a political weight distinct from, and in some ways more significant than, the structural damage itself. These are real consequences in this fictional construct, and I am not minimizing them. But they are not the main story. The main story is what this strike package communicates to every actor watching it. Not just Israel, Not just the United States. Every actor watching this event is updating its model of what Iranian military capability actually looks like in operational conditions. Not in test environments, not in single missile demonstrations, but in a sustained, multi-wave, multi-domain strike against the most advanced and most heavily resourced air defense architecture in the Middle East. And what that model update looks like is this. Iran has now demonstrated that it can generate a strike package of sufficient scale, sufficient sequencing sophistication, and sufficient electronic warfare support to impose meaningful attrition on Israel's defensive magazines in a single engagement. That is a threshold. That is not a minor upgrade to the existing threat picture. That is a fundamental revision of the strategic calculus that every actor in this region, and several actors far outside this region, has been operating on for the past decade. Ask yourself what this means for every government that has been assuming the Israeli air defense umbrella would hold against any conceivable Iranian strike. Ask yourself what it means for the insurance underwriters who have been pricing regional risk against that assumption. Ask yourself what it means for the alliance architecture that has been structured, at least in part, around the belief that Iran's ballistic missile force, while dangerous, could not penetrate a serious multi-layered defense in sufficient numbers to produce the outcome we are now watching. Every one of those assumptions is being stress tested in real time, and some of them are failing. But what I need you to hold on to, because this is the part that matters most, is that the assumptions failing tonight are not the most dangerous ones. The most dangerous assumptions are the ones about what Iran does next, and we have not arrived there yet. The hidden second layer. There is something happening beneath the visible strike that most people watching the explosions are not seeing, and I need to show it to you, because it is the architectural core of what Iran has actually launched tonight. When you fire 380 missiles at a target, with the most advanced air defense network in the region, you are not expecting all 380 to reach their targets. Iran's planners know the intercept rates. They have studied the system performance data. They have modeled the engagement sequences. They understand with considerable precision what percentage of their salvo the defensive architecture can neutralize under optimal conditions. They built this strike package knowing those numbers. So why 380? Because the objective is not destruction. The objective is depletion. The objective is to force the defending system to expend interceptors at a rate that cannot be sustained across multiple engagements. And then, having established that rate of expenditure, to confront the defending side with the political and strategic reality that the next phase of this conflict will begin from a position of reduced defensive depth. Iran does not need to win this battle to achieve its strategic objective. Iran only needs to make the next battle look sufficiently dangerous that the political will to continue the confrontation begins to fracture before the military hardware does. This is the second layer. Not the missiles in the air right now. The missiles in the air right now are the investment. The return on that investment arrives when the decision makers in Jerusalem, Washington, and every allied capital begin to calculate the cost of the next exchange against a defensive magazine that is measurably smaller than it was 48 hours ago. That calculation, that quiet, terrifying arithmetic, is happening right now. And it is happening inside governments that were not expecting to make it at this moment, under these conditions, with this degree of strategic exposure. The jamming, meanwhile, has not stopped. And that is where I need to take you next. Because what Iran's electronic warfare campaign is doing to the information architecture of this crisis is, in some ways, more consequential than what the missiles are doing to the physical one. I want to pull back from the immediate strike picture and show you something about the architecture of what Iran has been building in this fictional scenario over the years preceding this moment. Because the 380 missile salvo did not emerge from nowhere. It emerged from a strategic investment process that was patient, disciplined, and this is the part that was most consistently underestimated by the opposing intelligence architecture, operationally coherent from the very beginning. Iran's missile development program, as rendered in this scenario, is not a collection of prestige projects designed to impress domestic audiences and intimidate neighbors in peacetime. It is an integrated strike architecture built around a specific operational problem. How do you penetrate, saturate, and functionally overwhelm a multi-layered, American-backed, technologically sophisticated air defense network that has been specifically designed and continuously upgraded to stop you? That is the design problem. And the answer Iran has developed, over years of iteration, operational testing, and doctrinal refinement, is not a single overwhelming weapon. It is a system of systems designed to attack the defending architecture at every layer simultaneously. The short-range systems create lower-tier saturation. The medium-range systems force mid-tier interceptors into engagement. The ballistic warheads at the top of the flight envelope stretch the aero system to its performance boundaries, while the other tiers are draining the lower magazines. And threading through all of it, the electronic warfare packages that degrade the radar picture, complicate the engagement solutions, and introduce latency into the communication channels between sensor and shooter at the precise moment when decision speed is the most critical variable in the entire defensive equation. This is not improvised. This is doctrine. Mature, tested, operationally executable doctrine. The drone dimension adds another layer that I need you to see. In this scenario, the drone packages preceding the main missile salvo are not intended primarily as strike platforms. They serve two purposes that are more important than their individual warhead capacity. First, they extend the engagement window. They force the defending systems to begin the intercept cycle earlier, burning time and mental bandwidth in the command architecture before the main missile waves arrive. Second, and more critically, they generate electromagnetic signature data. Every time an air defense radar tracks a drone and illuminates it with targeting energy, that radar reveals its own position, its own frequency, and its own operational signature to the passive sensors that Iran has positioned to collect exactly that information. The drones in this construct are reconnaissance platforms disguised as threats. And the defending side, compelled by necessity to engage them, provides Iran with a continuously updated map of exactly which defensive nodes are active, exactly where they are operating, and exactly how they are responding to the incoming threat picture. That information flows back into the targeting solution for the main salvo, while the main salvo is already in the air. Ask yourself how you defeat a system that learns from your response to it while you are still responding. Let me be direct about something because precision matters here. Israel's air defense architecture in this scenario is not a failure. It is performing. It is performing remarkably, actually, against a threat that it was designed for and has been continuously upgraded to address. The Iron Dome has intercept rates that are the envy of every military in the world. David's Sling represents a genuine leap in medium-range intercept capability. The Arrow system, at altitude, is engaging threats that no other operational air defense system in the world can reach. The problem is not capability. The problem is mathematics under sustained pressure. Every layered defense system has a magazine depth. Every magazine depth has a replenishment timeline. And between the moment the magazines begin to drain and the moment they can be replenished, there is a window. Iran's entire strike architecture in this scenario is designed around the existence of that window. Not to destroy the system, to find the window. To hold the window open long enough that the political leadership on the defending side begins to make decisions based on what the window represents, rather than what the hardware still remaining in the magazines can achieve. There is also the question of coverage geometry. 380 simultaneous tracks, even with staggered arrival times, generate a spatial problem for any defense network that is not unlimited in the number of simultaneous engagements it can manage. The interceptor systems have a maximum simultaneous engagement capacity. When the incoming track count approaches or exceeds that capacity, the system is forced to make priority decisions. Which tracks get engaged? Which tracks do not? Those triage decisions, made in seconds under electronic interference with incomplete track data, are where the gaps appear. And Iran's launch geometry in this scenario has been calculated to generate incoming track density in exactly the sectors where the triage decisions are most difficult, and the consequences of a wrong decision are most severe. This is the trap. Not a trap of firepower, a trap of decision geometry. And the opposing side is inside it right now. The strike is still ongoing. In this scenario, the third wave has not yet completed its terminal approach, and the escalation architecture is already moving in ways that extend far beyond the immediate military exchange. The maritime picture in the Eastern Mediterranean is changing. Naval assets that were positioned in a standard operational posture 48 hours ago are now repositioning under alert conditions that reflect the updated threat assessment. This repositioning is visible, it is being observed, and it is generating its own set of signals to actors throughout the region who are watching the naval geometry as carefully as they are watching the missile tracks. In the Strait of Hormuz, which has been conspicuously quiet since the beginning of this fictional scenario's escalation, there are movements that have not yet registered on international monitoring systems, but that several governments are watching on their classified channels with considerable concern. Iran's naval and maritime militia forces have been repositioning assets in ways that do not constitute an overt threat, but that meaningfully change the choke point geometry in ways that every tanker captain and every shipping company's risk officer will be made aware of within the next 12 to 18 hours. The implicit message is not ambiguous. The strait remains open for now. The cost of keeping it open is being silently renegotiated. The energy markets have already moved. The speed of the price movement in this scenario reflects not just the immediate supply disruption risk, but the market's repricing of the entire security premium that has underpinned Gulf energy flows. When 380 missiles are in the air over one of the most militarily significant corridors in the world, the futures markets do not wait for the geopolitical situation to resolve. They price the tail risk immediately, violently, and in a direction that carries its own set of political consequences for every government whose domestic economy is sensitive to energy costs, which is every government. And in Washington, the emergency is already consuming institutional bandwidth that was not available before tonight. The NSC is in continuous session. The relevant combatant commands are on concurrent calls. The intelligence community is working against a collection picture that has been partially degraded by the same electronic warfare environment that is affecting the Israeli defense architecture. And the allied governments that are supposed to be in coordinated communication with Washington are receiving, as they always do in the first hours of a major escalation, messages that are urgent, partially informed, and not always consistent with each other. The coherence of the response is being built in real time against a timeline that Iran controls. Who is setting the tempo of this crisis? Look at that question without flinching, because the answer shapes every decision that follows. I want to spend significant time here on the weapon architecture, not for its technical interest, but because until you understand what this salvo represents doctrinally, you cannot understand the full weight of what Iran has demonstrated tonight. The ballistic component of the 380 missile package in this scenario represents something qualitatively different from the Iranian ballistic missile force of a decade ago. The earlier generation of Iranian ballistic missiles was large, relatively slow to prepare for launch, trackable during fueling operations, and characterized by a circular error probable that made them effective as area weapons, but imprecise against hardened point targets. The missile force represented in this fictional scenario is none of those things. Mobile, solid-fueled systems that require no fueling window and no extended launch preparation. Warheads with terminal guidance packages that produce a precision against fixed surface targets that removes the requirement for mass to compensate for inaccuracy. Maneuvering reentry vehicles on the higher performance systems that complicate the intercept geometry for exo-atmospheric interceptors during the terminal phase. And a launch sequencing architecture that coordinates the simultaneous or near-simultaneous arrival of threats from multiple azimuths against the same defended node, the so-called cross-axis strike geometry that is specifically designed to strain the engagement sector limitations of point defense systems. Each of these capabilities individually represents a significant upgrade to the threat picture. Together, in a single coordinated salvo of 380 rounds, they represent a qualitative shift in what Iran can deliver against hardened defended targets. A shift that the existing defensive architecture was not fully designed to address at this scale. The electronic warfare dimension deserves its own accounting. The jamming platforms supporting this scenario's strike package are not operating on the assumption that they will completely blind the opposing defense architecture. They are operating on the assumption that they need to degrade it sufficiently and for long enough to introduce meaningful latency into the engagement decision cycle. In a system where the difference between a successful intercept and a miss is measured in milliseconds of tracking data, a jamming environment that forces the radar to spend additional processing cycles resolving a confused track before committing an interceptor can be the difference between a successful engagement and an impact. At 380 simultaneous tracks, even a modest reduction in intercept probability at the individual track level produces significant changes in the aggregate outcome. This is precision applied not to the missiles, but to the defensive system's ability to respond to them, and it is, in the fullest sense, a weapon of architectural disruption. The drone layer carries one additional function that I have not yet addressed, and it is important. Several of the drone platforms in this scenario are carrying not explosive payloads, but electronic payloads. Systems designed to loiter in the engagement zone and collect real-time data on the defensive system's intercept performance. Which sectors are engaging? Which sectors are not? Where the coverage gaps are opening as the magazines drain. This data is being transmitted in real time to the strike coordination architecture, informing the targeting adjustments for waves that are still in transit. The battlefield is being read while it is being struck, and the strike is being adjusted based on what the battlefield reveals. That is not improvisation. That is the operational maturity of a force that has been building toward exactly this moment for years. In Washington, in this scenario, the nature of the crisis management problem that lands on the relevant desks in the first hours of this strike is unlike anything the system has processed before. And I mean that with precision, not for dramatic effect. The scale is new. A 380 missile salvo against Israel is not an event that fits comfortably inside the existing crisis response templates. The interagency processes that govern the American response have been designed around scenarios that that are, in the relevant respects, smaller, more containable, more attributable, more manageable within the existing alliance framework, without requiring decisions that carry civilizational scale consequences. What is arriving in Washington tonight does not fit those templates. And systems that cannot find the right template do not process smoothly. They generate competing recommendations, contradictory intelligence assessments, and a decision cycle that runs behind the operational tempo of the crisis it is supposed to be managing. The commitment architecture that the United States has maintained with Israel represents one of the most explicit and deeply institutionalized security relationships in American foreign policy. That commitment is real. What the commitment does not specify, what no commitment can specify in advance, is exactly what it looks like in operational terms when 380 missiles are in the air, and the question of direct American military involvement becomes an immediate, live, consequence-laden decision that must be made in hours rather than days. Different principles inside the same government are looking at the same situation and reaching different conclusions about what the commitment requires, what the operational risk of involvement entails, and what the second and third order consequences of various response options look like in a scenario where Iran has already demonstrated that its retaliation architecture extends beyond the immediate theater to include choke points, energy markets, and proxy networks that reach from the Gulf to the Eastern Mediterranean to the Red Sea simultaneously. The contradictory messaging that is emerging from official and semi-official channels in the first hours of this crisis is not dishonesty. It is the visible signature of an institutional architecture under genuine decision pressure, a pressure it was not configured to absorb at this speed, at this scale, from this direction. And every allied government watching Washington for a clear signal is instead receiving a picture of a system working to find clarity that is not yet available. Russia is not silent in this scenario. China is not absent. Both are watching with analytical interest that their diplomatic communications do not fully reflect, and both are making decisions about their own positioning, about their own communications with Tehran, about their own statements to the international community that will shape the political landscape of this crisis in ways that extend well beyond the current military exchange. The multipolar dimension of this moment is not background noise. It is a structural feature of the crisis, and it is one that the American response architecture is not well configured to manage simultaneously with the immediate military and diplomatic demands of the Israeli theater. Let me take you somewhere that the immediate crisis picture makes it difficult to look, but that I need you to see because it is where the real historical weight of this scenario resides. What we are watching in this fictional construct is not a battle with a winner and a loser that will be determined by the missile count and the intercept rate. What we are watching is a recalibration event, a moment at which the assumptions that have governed the strategic order of the Middle East, and by extension significant portions of the global order, are being publicly and operationally revised. The assumption that is being revised most fundamentally is this: that advanced American-backed air defense architecture represents a reliable deterrent against Iranian ballistic missile attack at the scale and sophistication that tonight's salvo has demonstrated. That assumption has underpinned Israeli security policy, American regional policy, Gulf state security calculations, and the deterrence architecture that has kept this conflict at a manageable level of intensity for the past decade. It has not been a perfect assumption, but it has been a functional one. Functional enough that the actors who depend on it have been willing to operate under it without being forced to make the harder choices that a less functional assumption would require. Tonight's scenario has not destroyed that assumption. The air defense systems are still functioning. Intercepts are still occurring. The full catastrophic failure that would represent the complete collapse of the deterrent has not happened. But the assumption has been degraded. It has been shown to have limits, specific, calculable limits, that were not publicly visible before this strike, and that are now part of the strategic knowledge base of every actor in the international system. That degradation carries consequences that extend far beyond the immediate theater. The governments of the Gulf states, each of which has made security calculations based partly on assessments of Iranian offensive capability and American defensive reliability, are updating those calculations tonight. The governments of the Abraham Accords framework are having conversations that will not be reflected in public statements for days or weeks. The governments of Asia, China, Japan, South Korea, India, each of which has significant economic exposure to Gulf energy flows and significant strategic interest in the stability of the Hormuz corridor, are watching this scenario and drawing conclusions about the reliability of the American security umbrella in the broader region. The oil market movement, which has been violent and sustained in this scenario, reflects not just immediate supply risk, but the market's pricing of a revised probability distribution for regional stability over a multi-year horizon. When that probability distribution shifts, it affects not just the price of oil, it affects the investment calculus for every project, every pipeline, every refinery, every piece of energy infrastructure in the broader region that has been priced assuming a certain baseline of strategic stability. The shipping insurance market is pricing a world in which the Strait of Hormuz is no longer assumed to be available without elevated risk premium. When that premium moves, it affects the economics of global trade flows in ways that register not just in the Gulf, but in every economy that imports goods or commodities that move through that corridor. And the alliance architecture that has been the structural framework of American strategic primacy in the Middle East, the network of security relationships, basing agreements, forward positioning arrangements, and implicit guarantees that together constitute American power projection in the region, is now being asked to respond to a scenario that tests it at every point simultaneously. Whether it holds, whether the architecture proves durable under this pressure, is the question that will define the next decade of Middle Eastern geopolitics, and the answer is not yet visible. I want to bring this scenario to its conclusion with the precision it requires, not with false certainty about outcomes that remain genuinely uncertain, and not with dramatic overstatement of consequences that are serious but not yet fully determined. With the precision that this moment demands. What has happened in this scenario, what I have walked you through in the architecture of this fictional construct, is a strategic demonstration. 380 missiles and a comprehensive electronic warfare campaign were not launched to destroy Israel. They were launched to prove something. To prove that Iranian military doctrine, at its current level of operational development, is capable of generating conditions that no existing regional defense architecture can fully neutralize without cost. The cost in this case is measured not in destroyed infrastructure alone, but in depleted magazines, degraded radar architecture, strained decision cycles, and most importantly, in the revision of every assumption about what the next confrontation will look like and what it will cost. That revision is permanent. You cannot undemonstrate a capability. You cannot rebuild the assumption of Iranian military limitation that existed before this salvo once the salvo has landed. The strategic knowledge base has been updated, and it has been updated in a direction that changes every calculation made by every actor in this theater going forward. The deterrence architecture that governed this region was built on a specific reading of the military balance, a reading that assigned Iranian offensive capability a definable ceiling, and assigned the Israeli-American defensive architecture a reliable floor. Tonight's scenario has moved the ceiling and tested the floor simultaneously. The ceiling is higher than it was assessed. The floor, while still present, is not as solid as the assumption required. What comes next, in this fictional construct and in the strategic logic that it is designed to illuminate, is a negotiation. Not a diplomatic negotiation necessarily, though that dimension will eventually emerge. A strategic negotiation, conducted through actions and restraints and repositioning and signaling, about what the new equilibrium of this theater looks like, about what deterrence means when the old assumptions have been revised, about what each actor is willing to risk, and what each actor believes its adversaries are willing to risk, in a landscape where the certainties that once defined the risk calculus have been replaced by a more ambiguous and more dangerous set of probabilities. Iran is not rushing. In this scenario, Iran never rushes. The patience that has characterized the entire build-up to this moment, the years of missile program iteration, the electronic warfare development, the doctrine refinement, the careful positioning and repositioning of assets in the weeks before the strike, that patience does not end with the salvo. The salvo was the message, and Iran is now waiting, with the same discipline that produced the message, to see how it is received. The cities that trembled tonight are still standing. The defense systems that strained tonight are still functioning, if diminished. The alliances that were tested tonight are still, for now, intact, if shaken. None of the worst outcomes of this scenario have fully materialized. But something has ended. What has ended is the period in which this conflict could be managed on the basis of the assumptions that predated it. The assumption that Iranian ballistic capability could be deterred by the credible threat of Israeli and American response without being tested at scale. The assumption that multi-layered air defense architecture would hold against a saturation strike architecture of this sophistication without meaningful attrition. The assumption that the political will of the coalition would remain coherent under the simultaneous pressure of military challenge, economic disruption, and strategic ambiguity that this scenario has delivered. Those assumptions governed a world, and that world has just changed. The missiles found their targets, but the real target was the map. The mental map that every strategist, every government, every military planner, every market operator was using to navigate this region. That map has been revised tonight, permanently, and the revision is not in a direction that makes any of the choices available to the opposing side easier, clearer, or cheaper. Tel Aviv trembled tonight. That much is visible. What is less visible, what I have been trying to show you across the full length of this scenario, is that the trembling is not in the buildings. The trembling is in the confidence. And confidence, once shaken at this scale, does not recover simply because the sirens stop. The next phase of this scenario is already in motion. Somewhere the decisions that will define it are being made, and the actors making them are working from a strategic reality that looks fundamentally different from the one they woke up to yesterday. I am watching that reality take shape. And what I am seeing, what I need you to understand before we close this scenario, is that the 380 missiles were not the climax of this story. They were the opening of the next one.